real pleasure to be here. I usually talk to agency crowds, but from a operations, project management, account management perspective, so it's great to be in front of you all today. I'm going to, and those of you that know of me, I'm not going to talk about Agile at all today. I'm going to talk about what we've learned in the last 8 years, and it's kind of interesting. I want to start off by talking about two clients. I think Marla mentioned, and thank you for the great intro, Marla. Marla mentioned that we're working on the client side, the brand side now. We have two very large California clients that we've been brought in to fix a transformation. Every company is trying to transform itself these days. And these are sort of typical example, multi-thousand person organizations. And one of them has put in a set of rules around what it means to be inclusive, empowering, acknowledge individuals, et cetera, and there we go. And one of the rules they have as part of their transformation to being a more inclusive, team-oriented, et cetera, organization is this: no high fives. And I was just struck by, in my opinion, the absurdity of this, because, in fact, if I want a team-inclusive sort of organization, I can't think of anything much more symbolic of everybody winning together than a group of people doing high fives over having succeeded as a team. Even if you're not playing, like in the sports metaphor, even if you're not playing on the floor or in the field at that moment, when your team wins, you get up and go do this. This is when one wins, we all win, et cetera. It's very, very, I invite you to Google high five and go to image search and scroll through those images, and you'll start smiling after a little while because everyone's so happy. This is a penultimate moment of human behavior, and even though the high five technically has only been around since 1977, according to Wikipedia, the celebration of success as a group probably goes back as far as we do as humans. And I think this is one of the things that it's easy to lose the idea of humanity when we think of organizations as having structure and process and things like that. And in fact, the thing that we've learned, which is really interesting, is that it is our fundamental humanity that makes transformation easier and better. I'm going to talk to you about ways to think about this and hopefully ways to help you do it. I have another client, the other large 13,000 person organization, that had a transformation designed by a big consulting firm whose name, well, McDonald's may remind you of their name in some way. And it's a mess, and that's why we're in there. Actually, we're the ones after the ones who came in after them. And they have these slogans, not Shepard Fairey style like this, I had this made, but they have these slogans all over the walls, like "We are empowered," or "Take charge," and that kind of thing. And it's a total mess. No one knows how to do it. What's it mean to be empowered? What do we do different? And so it struck me then that we'd actually learned some things by not trying to do transformation. Great, so now what? Yeah. By not trying to do transformation, but just by getting in the trenches and helping a bunch of agencies change. We've actually transformed a little over 100 agencies in the last 8 years. And we do this in very highly intense transformation, 4-week, 2-week, 1-week transformation processes. And we just had to figure it out, okay? And we never stopped to think about why it was working or anything like that. But going into these large organizations now, I say, no, that's all wrong, and they say, why? And so I had to explain it. And so this deck is actually a fairly well research-grounded view of thinking about transformation, and more importantly, it's easy to try and change, but it's very hard to make change happen and then have it endure afterwards. That is the single hardest thing. I think that's probably the single thing that we've learned that I can transfer you today is this idea of what does it take to make enduring change? Even when people agree that they want to change, it's hard to find a way to change and a way to make it stick. So that's my mission today. I've got 0 seconds left on the clock here, so I should either take a shot or it's time for halftime. All right, I don't know. Okay, fine. It's blinking at me too. There we go. Okay, thank you for... You know this already. You need to massive change, blah, 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 blah. I'm not even going to read the slide to you. But these, and this is a partial list of all the things you need to worry about. And by the way, great work. Thank you, 4As and Chick Foxgrover for the wonderful work we did last year on a piece that you can call the 4As and get a webinar arranged for you if you want to really get sort of a deep dive into what are all the factors of change and what are the dimensions that you should be doing in responding to it. Not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about how you manage a transformation. How do you design a transformation so it works? And the first question is, I'm looking at these slogans on the walls or hearing that we can't do high fives or teams aren't allowed to make comments about winning and all that kind of thing. Do you know good transformation when you see it? Why is it that I react differently than everyone else in the room when I see transformation, and yet we've done a lot of good transformations? I'll give you an example here that's sort of a fun one. Hopefully not too cheeky for this time of the morning. Transformation number 1 looks like this slogan that I'm sure you can find thousands of places across the US and elsewhere. We're inclusive and respectful of each other in our daily work. There's nothing you can argue with about that, okay? That's a good idea, okay? It'd be great if people behaved that way. Transformation number 2 is led by a different set of goals, which are take turns and don't be a dick. All right. So you might guess from the cheekiness of the question which one is more likely to succeed, okay? Or maybe you won't. But why? Why? I'll tell you, one is empirically better than the other. And why? And understanding why, I think, is going to be a really helpful thing for you guys. So let's go on this little journey through my brain and all that kind of thing. I've got a couple sections. One is, what are the 4 dimensions you need to deal with? It used to be 3 when I started writing the deck, so there are 4. So there may actually be 5. I just want to apologize in advance. Someone will ask a question at the end. I'll go, okay, there's a 5th dimension. Oh, yeah, a retro reference there. Okay, first dimension is how well you can change is an organizational muscle. And that is, if you aren't used to doing change as an organization, you're not going to be good at it. It's like the first time to the gym kind of thing. We've seen this vividly, especially, I can say this unequivocally in the agency space, is that when we work with digital shops, we work with traditional shops, the hybrids in between, all that kind of thing. The digital shops do it much more easily because they've had to do it every 2 to 4 years as new technologies come out, new competition and new needs from clients and all that kind of thing. And as they try to embrace traditional. Traditional shops, if you're an old school traditional shop, change is really, really hard because you're not used to thinking that way as a group. Second is that we're actually all really innately wired for adaptation. That is, in one way, if we get the other pieces right, everyone actually adapts really well. And this is something interesting, is that when I developed a framework that I'll show you in a minute, I realized we don't actually do all the pieces in the framework, but one of the pieces everyone does without us telling them what to do. So we're very adaptable as human beings, and you can see over time we find ways to morph into new roles and the like. I thought that was hilarious when I found that picture. And a lot of these things sound like platitudes. I'm going to bash platitudes in just a minute. But clarity and specification in the way you do the transformation is key. And being very, very specific and very, very clear about a couple things, which I'll take you through. And the last is there is a direction, a conceptual direction in which you need to, it appears, if I look at what we've done and what other people have done, I'll give you an example of someone else completely independent of us. There's a directional component to this that you need, and there's how do I build my way out there? And I'm going to give you the little list at the end, and I'll also give you some very specific things to start with as sort of that specificity guide as well. So, okay, transformation components, natural change muscle, innate adaptation skills. These are things that you have in your organization already. You only have so much muscle, right? But you have the fact that everyone can adapt, and you need to supplement that with having purpose and direction to your transformation and being very clear about how you're asking people to do things differently. Sounds like a lot of platitudes, I know, but we'll get into some details on it. And that's you're supporting the natural change that the organization can do. Let's talk about your organization. A lot of books, when they talk about organizations, they talk about them using the nomenclature, the structures, the references that were designed in the early ages of age of industrialization, okay? Talking about process and flow and work units and departments and things like that. And your business isn't like that, especially as an agency, but most people's businesses should not be like that either. Your business operates more like a society, and you can see this in a more popular research work, Edgar Schein's work on, he's got a bunch of great little books, but Humble Inquiry is probably one of his best. Schein's new work model points to the transitions that are happening in the workforce, and you guys are aware of all these, but I highlighted the ones on the right. The ones on the right look like a society, a group, a tribe, whatever word you want to use, a pod, a squad, that kind of thing. It's about everyone working together. So I came up with this model, and then I'm doing work, as Marla mentioned, I'm doing work at RAND Corporation, actually still, on next generation organizational models and the like. And I'm working with a cultural anthropologist, Kate Seek is her name. She used to be in the agency biz. But I showed her this model, and she goes, oh, that's from cultural anthropology. Da, da. So apparently got lucky that blind bird gets a few worms. So mission and values, what we believe in, okay? Culture or behavior. And I want to point out, culture is not about free beers and dogs in the room. Culture is actually literally how you behave as an organization. And to put a very specific point on it, culture is the collection of all behaviors in any given context in which the business operates. Okay? Okay, and it even gets worse than that, by the way. Okay, but we'll hold off for that. Then there's organization and roles. Okay, where we fit and sort of what our responsibilities are in that context. And then there's sort of the actual mechanics of the process, who does what we're trying to accomplish, and then tools, things that we use to do it. This corresponds apparently to what's called the anthropological cultural layer cake or something like that, but I meant to look that up, sorry about that. So healthy organizations have really good alignment between these layers. In other words, sort of what we say in terms of mission and values. What we say in terms of mission and values manifests in our behaviors, and we're organized in a way that reflects that, and our processes enable that, and the tools are designed for it. Right? That's a healthy organization. When you think of transformation, especially large-scale transformation like you're going to be going through for the next 3 to 5 to 10 to however many years, maybe a continuous state of transformation. Transformation looks like what was the old model and what's the new model going to be. Oops, it built, sorry about that. What's the new model going to be, right? And how do I transition each of those layers? So in a sense, you can't do them all at once. So there is a timing and sequence problem here, right? What do I do first? So I'll inform you of that. Boom, there we go. All the layers in the pyramid form a system, and everyone will fight for it to make sense. Okay? This is a very natural human thing. This is our adaptation function. Okay? We will work to try to be a group, whatever it means to try to be a group. If it's snarky comments about what leadership says versus what we're asked to do, that'll be part of being part of the group, right? But we'll find a way to bring that all together. So the interesting thing that we found is that when we think about aligned transformation, I'm going to use an example of meetings. This is the best cheesy stock photo I could find. Let's take this goal of meetings should be valuable and inclusive to all, because our workplace is going to be valuable and inclusive to all. And so the typical thing that happens, we've seen this happen multiple times, is everyone says, okay, we're going to change today. Meetings should be valuable and inclusive to all. And that's what I call platitude. We're coming through the mission values focus, right? But meanwhile, nothing else changes except that someone put a poster on the wall that said meetings should be valuable and inclusive to all. Or maybe be nice and respectful. Or we're all empowered to have great meetings, right? All those kinds of things. And meanwhile, the existing technology, which in this case would be an agenda, okay? It's a tool, right? Someone has to make the agenda, right? And so we use the agenda in a fixed process way. That all requires someone to be the organizer of the meeting, and they run the meeting driving everyone through what the organizer thinks needs to be in the meeting. And so we get this situation where we've got managers driving the meeting, exhibiting dominant behaviors, and staff members variously doing things like complying, often passively, conflicting and engaging in conflict, fighting over the agenda. Why are we talking about this? Why aren't we talking about X? Or being avoidant, like looking at Facebook on their computer during the meeting, or doing emails, sending emails to other people. So what we end up with is essentially a sort of cultural behavioral chaos inside of this. Meetings, in fact, are horrible in terms of effectiveness. There's a lot of cool research out there on them. They're judged to be less than 50% effective in virtually every situation, just a few exceptions. And one of the biggest things is that even the people who organize meetings rate them as more effective, but they still rate them as around 60% at best effective. And the people who are organized into meetings rate them, of course, much lower because it needs to average out and all that kind of thing. So one of the things you're going to get a sense of here is that if I work on this transformation of this pyramid from either end, there's sort of an implied value cultural model around this, is that if I push an agenda, okay, it sort of drives to a logical, I can start at either end. It drives to a logical conclusion at the other end, right? And essentially, any structure, this is true for software, by the way, is every single piece of software in the world, it's a tool, and it has an implied process model that's not your process model. And in that process model, there are organization and role assumptions, which is not your organization nor your roles. And then if I have all that, then I've got to have a set of behaviors that the software supports, which are not necessarily your behaviors. They're just the behaviors that the software people thought of when they're writing the software. And that all forms a culture. And that's why software, especially broadly implemented, is so hard to implement and get people to adopt. Because it assumes a mindset and a behaviors and an organizational style. We go in and detune, a lot of times we'll go in and detune a piece of software at a client. A great example, we'll take a piece of project management software, a task management, workflow management software, and we will actually go in, and normally it's like, we assign the task to creative or to production or whatever. We'll assign all the tasks to the project manager, okay? To the producers. So no one gets tasks assigned to them. And guess what? Things go faster. Why? Because people know what they need to get done. They don't need a piece of software telling them. In fact, if you try and take control of people, they become less productive. And that's not very inclusive of their own skills and adaptation and talent and autonomy and competence and all that kind of thing. So we actually turn all those features off in a piece of software, and that works pretty well. Yeah, you can see where everything is, but everyone's doing work getting it done faster. Be careful of any tool that you adopt. It has an implied cultural model, and it has an implied set of values. Great article in The Economist a couple of years back that basically all the modern software that does workflow or business management is dehumanizing. Think about that. Famous phrase, anyone heard this one? Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Very cute, cheeky kind of phrase. He's an awesome guy. Let me explain it a little bit differently. New values, tools, or processes. Hey, we've got this value. We're going to be better with each other. We've got this new tool. This will save our agency. Or here's a new way of doing things. Hey, even agile can be this, right? Okay. Without strictly defined new behaviors, in other words, without us attacking the middle of that triangle, okay, are defeated by the existing behaviors. The strongest, most resilient part of that triangle is the cultural behavior component, and a little bit the organization roles component. Because we get locked into our beliefs about what role we play in the organization, and if I'm not changing both of those things at the same time, then we're very resistant. So it's sort of, you can think about it this way, is that values and behaviors relate this way, is that there's sort of the talk and the walk. And in that example I gave, platitudes often end up as non-aligned values. Okay? Meetings should be valuable to everyone. And in fact, it's her meeting, not ours, and that means that there's a loss of connection here. In general, though not always, in general, the behaviors usually win. Okay? Especially if you're trying to, even if you've had those values for a while, if the people need to do the behaviors in order to execute and succeed in the organization, the behaviors dominate their thinking about how aligned the organization is. Now, I've been saying the word behavior, and I told you it's a little bit more complex than you probably think, and it actually goes really, really deep. A lot of great work done on this in the 1970s. One of them was a guy named, I think, Ron Schenck. He wrote a book called Scripts, Plans, Goals, and Understandings, which you can buy on eBay now. Unfortunately, it's a great book. I'm going to give you an example of how this works. He was brilliant in this way. He stood on great shoulders, of course. You walk into a delicatessen of sorts. And you want to order something, of course. And there are actually people there, as shown in this picture. And some are up against the counter, they have the glass case, and others are in a line, sort of waiting at the register and the like. You're in a foreign country. What do? Which line do you get in? One of those groups may have just come off a bus from some other country, and that's the way they do it in their country. This is not your country. You don't know what to do. In fact, you don't even know how to ask. You may not even know how to ask politely. Forget the language barrier, but just, who do I ask? Is it polite to go ask? Should I ask the person behind the counter? Should I ask someone in line? Should I? And if I go stand up against the case, is the protocol that I should like squeeze in and fight as hard as I can to get seen? Or is there a little protocol going on inside of this sort of queue of people piled up against the case? This is a decision that is all about 2 seconds of your life, right? What do I do? Maybe 5 seconds. For me, maybe 10. I stare and wonder, what in the hell do you do here, right? And you realize at that moment, if you're following what I'm saying, that we actually have very detailed scripts about every single situation that we live in. If you think, I'll give you another one real quickly that Schenck used in his book, was walking up to the host station at a restaurant. You expect a very specific set of dialogues, okay? They're like only 3, I don't remember the exact thing. There are only like 3 responses you expect as standard responses from the host or hostess, which include things like, hold on a minute, okay? Or let me go see, or that'll be a while, or, okay, there we go, 4, yes, we have something available, but you're used to all of those scripts. And if someone does a different script, you'll like blink and go, huh? You may mistake someone for being the host, right? And ask them a question. They'll say something goofy back if you've had that happen before. And you're like, no, this isn't in the script. And then you finally realize that they're not even that person in that role in this organization, right? But we are very, very highly scripted people. And in fact, it's a really, really good thing, okay? Scripts are how we understand things. Okay? Scripts are how we understand how to work with each other. Scripts are really, literally how we behave. If you've raised children or been around people raising children, scripted behavior is the core of socialization. What parents do, I would say 98% of the time, is explain to children which script is appropriate in which situation. Okay? Now, we are so used to doing it, we don't even notice this. But in fact, one of the best ways to think of human beings is that we are script processing machines. And we do it without, it's all subliminal, it's all below the conscious. Once we know a script, we just act it out without thinking, oh, I'm going to pull up the walk up to the host stand script right now, and I wonder which 3 or 4 standard responses I'll get back, right? We don't even do that. That's just called living, okay? Living for us is actually living with these scripts. They're very persistent, okay? If once we learned a script, if we were like, felt we could go freeform with it all the time, it would just be chaos. Okay? The fact that we have a society that behaves in an orderly way or a workplace where we get things done repeatedly over and over comes from this ability to learn, memorize, and repeat scripts over and over and over. So what does that say about new scripts? Anyone? Yeah, hard to learn, right? You get it? okay? I mean, we've all had that situation. We've all had to learn new scripts. Okay? So that means that clarity and specification about what we're really asking people to do is really key in any transformation. I'm going to give you an example of what this, you sort of get this point, I think. Let's go to this thing right here. So now when we look at this two transformations perspective, okay, if I look at transformation number one, what sort of behavioral clarity do I have in this? Okay. What does being inclusive look like? What does being you could kind of go being respectful, right? Okay. But it's a platitude that gives me no guidance in terms of how to actually do it. So unclear behavior is expected out of this. There are some behaviors, clearly, but this sends me into chaos. Says, am I being inclusive? How do I be inclusive? No high fives? Does that help? Now, let's look at this other one. By the way, I took the Don't Be a Dick from Firstborn here in New York. That's one of their little behavioral models in terms of meetings. Don't be a dick. Take turns and don't be a dick. Suppose I had 10 people in a meeting and I surveyed them afterwards about, on the left-hand side, was the meeting held in an inclusive and respectful way? I think I'd get a lot of bad data. Okay? It could be a kind of bad meeting and people still might say, yeah, I guess, yeah. I didn't see anything non-inclusive, whatever that means. But if I surveyed people in transformation number two, in that meeting, did everyone take turns? And was anyone a dick? I'd get some really, really good data. In fact, if we all agree on these guidelines, then I'm not even afraid to say, hey, I think we need to all be taking turns. Because if I, in that meeting, instead said, hey, I think we all need to be more inclusive, everyone will look at me and go, hey, fine, let's stay to the agenda, right? We're on the agenda. That's being inclusive. Clear and measurable behaviors. So one last idea on this is what's called transformation direction. And from the pyramid, I'm going to give you an example. This is from Ricardo Semler. You may know him from Maverick or 7-Day Weekend. Ricardo Semler is the CEO of a company called Semco. It's about 15 years ago or so. He transformed the company, turning it upside down, inside out, by rewriting all the values and behaviors inside the organization. And here's what he did with meetings. Very, very interesting. You can attend any meeting that you want to. Okay, that's kind of inclusive, right? Pretty good, okay. You can convene a meeting if you want to. All right, so everyone plays fair, flat organization. It gets really interesting now. You do not need to attend a meeting if you don't feel it's valuable. By the way, meetings are actually like being held hostage. It's like me walking up to the front door of your home at 6 p.m., knocking on the door and saying, what's for dinner? And if you're not having me over for dinner, you have to apologize to me, even though I presume that I could have your time for dinner and that kind of thing. So that's what putting a meeting on someone's calendar is like, the way the technology is designed. The technology is designed that, of course, everyone should go to meetings, okay? And of course, everyone's time is available to anyone else who wants it, right? Very, very strange effect, okay? So I don't have to attend a meeting. So this is interesting now. If I want to convene a meeting, how do I get people to attend? I have to talk to them in advance and make sure that they think that this is worth having a meeting over. And I need to talk to them about when we can meet. That's a good time to make valuable use of their time and our time. That's really, all of a sudden we start being really inclusive all of a sudden. It's kind of nice, huh? Nor do you need to stay if the meeting ceases to add value. So I go through all this work to organize a meeting, and then when the meeting's happening, what do I need to do as the organizer? Make sure everyone's getting a lot of value out of it. What do you get out of this formula? Well, he said, but I can see also how it can happen. Less meetings. Everyone's in favor of that, right? But second is more valuable meetings that work very well. Again, a set of behaviors. If you map this onto this model, he started with the value is that, look, we want these meetings to be valuable and inclusive, et cetera. And then put a set of behavioral rules around it. And then that essentially drives the rest of the process. And they, of course, had probably some explicit things anyone can organize, Organizer needs to get alignment and agreement about having the meeting, and then the tool for what we discuss is what we all discussed we would talk about at the meeting. So a completely aligned sort of organization, an aligned meeting, and if you're in that meeting, you'll go, wow, this is really inclusive, right? Okay. So it turns out that if we get this alignment between tools and process and value and culture, it sticks, okay? If the tools and process actually make sense from the values and culture perspective, then everything works. I mentioned before, the organization roles thing, we're really good at adapting to that ourselves. So essentially you can sort of obliterate organization roles a little bit, at least from a conceptual perspective, and people will reform and figure it out. Our material is quite lax in that, our training materials, and it turns out people just work it out, okay? None of the other pieces could you work out, but that piece, they go, okay, well, you know what? Jason usually organizes these things because he has time to go coordinate with everyone and whatever. And so the meeting organizer becomes the person who's the best at organizing meetings, right? Not necessarily someone who's in charge of something or not in charge of something or whatever. Okay, so I'll wrap up and we'll have a few minutes for questions here. I talked about the sort of the landscape, understand your natural change muscle. The innate adaptation skills your organization has, and the only thing you need to be careful about is a thing called dominance, which will suppress people's adaptation. They'll look to others to think about what they should be doing. But otherwise, you don't need to do a lot there. Natural change muscle just changes with your changing. But the degree to which you have those things, you'll need to supplement them, or that you don't have those things, you'll need to supplement them with very specific transformation, very specific clarity. I think in talking about our transformations, we've done a digital shop and a traditional shop of the same size. We need to spend about twice as much time with the traditional shop doing the things on the bottom. And a lot of it is just saying them over and over and repatterning behaviors. And not because people aren't trying to learn, okay, but just because it takes a lot of repatterning if you're not used to change and you're not used to having the right to adapt and all that kind of thing. So those are the two things you supplement. I promised you some examples. Oh, here we go. So basically, this may seem obvious now, but I wanted to make sure you had this in the deck and everything. What are the underlying beliefs and values that you want to change or replace? Okay. So you can't do, we want to be more inclusive, everyone should feel empowered. You're going to need to go look at the functions inside the organization and actually architect what are the key behaviors that we have inside of those things. I'm going to give you a list, a great sample list that we've culled together and a reference also, but you need to actually do an inventory and architect that sort of transformation. You won't get there otherwise, I don't believe. Think about that in terms of behaviors. Okay? Define them. So what we do first is we actually define the beliefs and socialize them as, I didn't put this on here, real key. You need to define the belief and socialize it in terms of how it's not happening today and what the cost is. This is Prokashka's change model. You need to get people thinking about why to change before they'll change. And that leads to thinking about how I might change. And then that leads to actually changing. It's called pre-contemplation of change. Define the new behaviors. That is, teach them and then add in process and tools. A very big thing is we learn in groups. One of the things we got really successful at just accidentally is we train everyone when we train them. Don't train just managers. So I train just managers, and managers are telling everyone else what to do, and I'm trying to undo dominance and authority and control in the organization. How have I done? I failed immediately. It doesn't even matter what they're saying. The fact that you're doing it that way is a failure. You've got to train everyone, and it's a group activity. We learn best as groups. And then you need to repeat and reinforce. It doesn't have to take a long time, but you need to do it over and over. I'll tell you, one of those big clients that I referred to at the beginning, the California companies with all the slogans, did their initial training to transform their whole organization from a monolithic dinosaur to an highly agile blah, 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 with 4 hours of training for everyone. Okay? And most of the training, I've seen the decks, most of the training was just repeating the platitudes over and over. How fun it'll be if we're all agile, that kind of thing. It's crazy. It's really crazy. And everyone's like, so what do I do now? So I've got a thing on medium.com called the Humanist Agile Manifesto. It was my collection of behaviors, okay? So you find it on Medium, and in this deck, I'll leave the slide in and a couple others, but here are a couple of them out of there, and I've tuned them up just so they're really tight for you guys. Take turns. Virtually every group activity, you should always be taking turns. In fact, even more so, the people who start and end those activities should not be the people who have hierarchy in the organization. Very, very simple. You do it all kinds of ways. We do it with tennis ball that gets passed around. You can do it with cards. Everyone's got to write just on little cards and take turns. All kinds of ways to do it. But that's a behavior that if we take turns, we're better together. Think about the campfire, sitting around, cave people, primitive, take turns talking. Make sure everyone understands, go no faster than the slowest. Okay? You want to design a process, make sure you do it so that when the process is complete, everyone understands everything they need to understand. Relinquish control. Okay? And this is, again, one of those things, if you're going to design a process, design it so that people describe what they need to do rather than someone telling them what they should do. Giving up control creates empowerment. Okay? Right now, largely all the managers, directors, leaders in your organization, especially in the middle of the organization, assert high control levels over the people that work for them. I can tell you right now, you lose 20 to 30% of your productivity as a result of that, empirically. It's in the research, but we've also seen it in our work as well. People need to understand not only what they need to do, but why they need to do it. We are meaning-making machines. We use reason, okay? Meaning-making machines need to know meaning, and meaning comes from why. Why does the client want it that way? Why does it need to be done by when it needs to be done by? If you give people why, they perform a lot better. And then when things go wrong, they know how to do the what differently, because they know the why, which reduces the amount of managerial interaction as well. Group communication works way better than writing things. By the way, written communication works horribly. Email is the last resort of communication. If you're all in the building, there should be almost no substantive email going on between people, except maybe to coordinate schedules or something like that. Make sure everyone's present. No computers, no phones, no nothing in a meeting. Make the time valuable, make it focused. Don't tell people, ask them. Very simple shift. We teach it in a manager and leader training, saying, someone says, here's the work I've done. What do you think? If you're the leader, manager, director, whatever, you should say, I don't know, what do you think? Now that sounds like a bullshit question, I know. But then you might say, what do you think the client would say? Or why would she say that? What do you think the client was asking us to accomplish? And even if you know the answer, you teach them to think about it the way you think about it. And then when you actually give them an answer, your answer, they will absorb it better. And they'll feel more included, more part of the team. And of course, don't be a dick. All right, just to wrap, and then we'll go to Q&A. I wish you, hopefully this is all helpful to you. I'll be around for the rest of the day, most of it. If you have questions, happy to talk, and I apologize for anything I missed that you wanted to know. We do have some Q&A time, but I wish you some high fives in your transformation efforts as well. So.
So first of all, good morning, and thank you, Jack. You know, being part of an organization that's in its 4th year of its transformation, I fundamentally support the idea that the ability to change is like an organizational muscle. So it's something that needs to be practiced and exercised constantly. I'd also imagine that the room, people are probably pondering and thinking about what it means to be part of an aligned meeting. Because I could tell you, I'm sure that there are instances where I would have been in a meeting and I would have liked to have gotten up and left because there was no value being added. Jack, we do have a couple of questions. I want to make sure that we're able to get to them. What's the role of leadership and staff in driving transformation and defining new scripts?
I think you do need, it's a great question. I think you do need an architect of the process, and you can do that internally, absolutely. I think that having leaders and managers we tend to train them first with a layer of what the change is going to look like. So in one way or another, either by being taught that way or by defining themselves they need to do it. I think that the challenge is that in the rollout, a lot of times the rollout of that then looks like you should do this, you should do that, you should do that, versus we do actionable learning, sort of workshop format, and here's how we do it. Let's do it with this account, okay? Here's when a request from the client comes in. Here's how we're going to do it now, and have everyone walk through it. Essentially give them enough guide rails that they can try it, learn, and fail, et cetera, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think essentially leaders and managers should actually think of themselves more as facilitators and mentors in that process than directing what should happen.
How do you train new behaviors to everyone at once?
By doing it with them all, yeah. So we do cut it up. We cut up into groups of 30 people at a crack. Yeah, you need to sort of immerse them. You can't do 200 people. Again, actionable. Probably should put that on the slide. Actionable learning, real world. We don't have case study examples, nor should you. You should do real world stuff. Go in and take an account team for that client, those 30 people, and just train them in it until they get it right. Okay. Yeah.
Another good question. How do we communicate the scripts to the organization?
You know, it's funny. We had a large client, actually I can say Global Team Blue, 3,200 person organization. They paid us a fortune to write the book on how to do the stuff, right? I told you documentation doesn't work, okay? And someone called us the other day and was asking where it was, okay? We had a copy, of course, but we learn best by mimicry, okay? And so it really is just people need to see how other people are doing it, and that's where that group training works best, really. You just have to be ready to go in and say, okay, here's how it's going to happen now. Let's do it and work out the problems and the kinks and the misunderstandings. And you will never have all the information you need in there.
Next question. Could you repeat? Switch that question. In a large organization.
That was, I think, Ricardo Semler.
Semler.
Semler. Books are Maverick and 7 Day Weekend, or it was Edgar Schein, Schein, one of those two. So,
okay. The next question is a great one because, again, this is a good learning experience for all of us. I can speak to it. In large organizations, how do you monitor, enforce, and uphold the new behavior?
So the primary line of defense is that if you have great alignment, everyone else will want to do it, right? Because it makes sense. You'll get like, hey, I thought we were supposed to be taking turns. Anyone in that meeting can say, hey, I thought we were supposed to be taking turns. That's the ultimate best defense, is that this is the way that we behave, right? More practically, you'll want to have sort of a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of thing going on, where there are a set of people that actually go around and make sure the behaviors are being best practiced. I will tell you, the hardest people to make the transition are managers and leaders, okay? Teams are ridiculously easy. They snap to the new way of doing things quite easily, okay? 70 to 80% of our time and work is spent on getting managers and leaders to stop doing it and let the teams do what they naturally do.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Jack for...
Well, real quick. Great book, Crucial Conversation. I forget the author name. Talks about silence and dominance, silence and violence and conversation. Highly recommend it. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.